Michael, when you reach a stage where you're working with a, I mean, it must be one of the most speculative young managers in world football. Is Steven Gerrard going to go on to be the greatest ever? You know, everybody has great faith in that he's on a journey to somewhere high up, and I think he speaks quite openly about what his own dream job would be. But as you've worked with all these, I mean, just the giants of the management world, you know, how much have you learned from each of them? Or have you stuck to maybe something that excluded their input?
Yeah. Some people just got something when they walk in a room. I think that's fair to say. Like I was a young Chelsea fan and working there as a 23-year-old when Mourinho came, and I saw that first press conference when he said he was a special one, and everyone was like, who's this guy? Do you know what I mean? Even though he'd done well at Porto. And then I had the chance to go and watch him work, and he'd come and said hello. The Chelsea Academy, the academy manager Neil Bark was fantastic at getting these new managers, and we had like 9 managers in 10 years or whatever it was coming in. It'd be fantastic at getting them to present, or one of their staff to present, or giving us opportunities to go over and watch. So I saw these coaches from a distance rather than working closely with them, but Mourinho just had this thing about him. But the other thing, in terms of how he carried himself,
presence.
He had a fantastic presence, and I don't think he's saying you can fake. You either got it or you haven't. So he had that. So he had that in straight away. But he's planning, and his organisation of a training pitch was meticulous. It's the best I've seen. It straight away opened your eyes up to wow. The way that the session was laid out, the way that different members of staff took the session, the way that you moved the different areas of the pitch, just the way that it looked. To me, it looked like a military organisation. And I just thought, wow, like that is elite, really elite. And obviously these guys have a clear vision, and from that vision they speak with real confidence. And I think that goes over to their players. And certainly in Mourinho's case, and the one who's my personal favourite, was Carlo Ancelotti, because I think he's just such a interesting person. Because he was obviously a very, very good player. He's now worked in big clubs and learnt the languages in each of them big clubs around the world, which is something that I find, you know, something that for me is very desirable as a young coach. I also listen to the big players after he leaves. I've not heard anyone speak ill of him. I also think he leaves the clubs in a really good place. Yeah. You know, some managers go into a club, and when they leave, they generally leave in turmoil when the next guy comes in. And what Ancelotti's managed to do, managing in France, England, Italy, Germany, is when he goes into a club, he very much buys into the culture of that club and then plays, and that club's in a nice way. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I really like him. I learnt a lot from him in terms of he trained 10v10 a lot. And a lot in direction, so a lot of the practice were obviously attack and defend, but one way, no multi-directional practice, very like working towards the game, players playing in position, a lot of staff around it. Obviously it helped at the time that Paul Clement moved up from 18s to reserves to first team coach very quickly under Ancelotti, so there was a lot more being drip fed down because of the relationship between Paul and some of the academy staff. So that was a particularly exciting time to see them two. And then obviously I knew Brendan Rodgers as a young coach, and his accent certainly draws you in, and he was a very, very good youth developer. I see the best in young players, which I think all of these coaches have got in common. They see something in someone and they really invest time in the journey and getting it out. Brendan obviously as a young coach well spoke Spanish, and he, you know, so again he was someone that was forward thinking in his learning. So I enjoyed working with him when we was at Chelsea. I worked with him closely enough at Liverpool as reserve manager, and then Jurgen Klopp come in. Complete different way of playing to Brendan. Both believed in pressing and high energy, but Jurgen was very meticulous in how he went about it and the way that he worked the working week, and his personality is just how you see it on the TV. But again, he's very, very clear of his vision. Like, I would only, like, from the little bits I saw of Mourinho, just the little bits I saw as a real distance, and then the bits I saw much closer to Jurgen Klopp, them two really, what shone over to me was their presence, their personality, which is completely different to hold the group, but their vision. They're very, very clear on what they want, and I think that clarity certainly helps their players.
Yeah, How much of that's rubbed off on you then, mate?
Quite a lot. Like with Jurgen, I didn't realise how much until I left Liverpool and went to Sao Paulo and started to try and put that team together, how much of an influence he had on me defensively in organisation, out of possession. I've always been a big Johan Cruyff fan, and I think that he's the most important person in the history of football, both for the way he played and then the ideas that he has as a coach outside. That contradicts quite strongly with Jurgen's type of play. However, that was something for me as a coach when I was working under Jurgen, trying to get the young players to play like his team so they could get in there, that you have a little bit of an inner battle with, but you do what's right for the kids. But then when I left Liverpool and went to Sao Paulo and now come to Rangers, a lot of what he taught me and what I learned from him and his staff about defensive organisation stuck. And I'm really grateful for that, because I was a bit of a Cruyff fantasist in terms of I spent probably 90% of my football coaching and development on with the ball and how we expressed ourselves with the ball. And so I learned lots and lots from Jurgen, more than anybody.
Man management rather than football technique.
Yeah, I think I was obviously older, and I was in a position, when the other coaches were at Chelsea, I was taking the under-10s, the under-12s, under-13s, 14s, so I always coached the right football I had to have my under-14s hat on and my under-10s hat on. I wasn't trying to be a mini Mourinho with the under-14s. By the time I was working under Jurgen, I was a under-23 coach trying to get people in his team. So I had to literally spend every day learning and understanding how his team played. Spent a lot of time with one of his assistants, Pepin Linders, who's a good friend, understanding what he was asking of players and what demands. The physical demands he put on the players in training was much higher than Brendan before him, and that was interesting. And a few of the players broke, but he wasn't, and he had a lot of injuries when he first went there, but he wasn't ruffled by that. He continued with that, and their bodies adapted. And then I sort of had that drum home to me when I went to Sao Paulo, and we were playing so many games, and we were travelling a lot, and we were training hard, and because the Brazilians like to train hard right into the game, it was different. And I saw the bodies adapt there as well. So these were two things that I saw, that it's amazing if you push your body, what it can accept,
what it can achieve. Yeah.
And ultimately, if that's how you want to play the game, you've got to push them. You've got to take them to another limit. And I saw it with young players that went from my team in the academy across to Melwood to the first team at Liverpool and practice with Jurgen, and they would come back 5 or 6 weeks later, and I'd be like, wow. So then that was an important moment for me, because was I holding them back? Was I restricting them? This thing of sports science now, is it ruling or is it on tap? Are we limiting? So are we telling them how long they can train? Are we managing limitations, or are we trying to exceed them? Are we trying to push them? And that's really interesting, especially for development coaches. Is it development sports science or is it performance sports science? When would you put performance sports science, or if you can only train this amount of days and this amount of hours on young players? Do they need to pull a thigh muscle, kicking the ball against the wall with a right and left foot to develop their technique?
But I think a lot of this now is reflected on your own values, because we've already had that discussion that you were a development coach, you're now working as a performance coach, but continuing to develop these assets, these young players who have, in previous years would have been considered, they've made it, they've reached their destination. But you see it as a continuous journey. Yeah,
I see it as a journey. I like to go on the journey with the player, and I think that's it. I think if you invest in them and you spend time with them. My role now as a first team coach, I'm not that into the one-to-ones like I was as under-23s manager. It's a different role. I'm a first team coach now. We have an unbelievable assistant manager in Gary McAllister with his experience, and Stephen. They take on that role. I take on the role more of a field coach to support our ideas, but I still invest in the journey with the players. Me and Tom, the other field coach, we are still putting on individual practice to kick players on. With first team players, it's much more of a collaboration. So with a young player, before he breaks through, there's always the fear that if he doesn't listen and take on the work that you're encouraging him to do, that he might not get there. I think a young player has that lovely innocence that they're worried. A first team player is much more of a collaboration because they can, they're already in a good position in life. They're already earning lots of money and have a nice house and everything that most people want.
No,